So, you've heard about this My Fairy system in Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, but you don't have a clue what any of it means. Well, I'm here to explain it all to you at last. Now, the on-screen footage that I'm going to be using for this guide is going to be a little bit limited in some ways, because I play the Japanese version of Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. So, anything where it comes to describing what the skills do, or describing the names of the different personality traits of the My Fairies, I'm going to have to cut away to just some wiki footage or something, because all of it's going to be in Japanese, and therefore not very helpful for my English-speaking audience. So, to start at the beginning of this whole thing, everything to do with the My Fairies can only begin when you've started to play on the first Adventure Mode map. There are no fairies to collect in the Story Mode, so if that's all you play, you'll pretty much never see any of the My Fairy content. When you get to playing the Adventure Mode, you'll see on the map there are icons for all of the different My Fairy stuff. You can see this bag icon, which indicates that there is a My Fairy food item on this map. You can also see this icon for a fairy, which indicates that there is an actual My Fairy for you to collect. You won't be able to do anything with the clothes or the food that you collect for the My Fairies until you actually get yourself a My Fairy. So, for the My Fairies themselves and the My Fairy food, it is collected on these Adventure Mode maps in one of the brown pots that are found inside the fortresses on whatever map you're playing in. Something to note about the food is that it's not only gained by doing the battles that actually have the food on the maps. However, the food won't start dropping until you've started to gather a lot of different kinds of food. For example, you won't start to get milk until you've found the first battle that has milk on it and gathered it. Therefore, you should try to gather as much of the food items as you can before progressing deeply into the game, or else you're going to miss out on a lot of food that you could have otherwise gotten from regular enemies. Also, the food icons on the actual maps themselves do refresh over time, so there's really no way to get rid of them all eventually. Sorry. The My Fairy clothing items, which are indicated on the maps by a gift icon, and once you're actually hovering over the actual challenge, it'll give you some kind of representation of if it's a hat, or a torso, or pants, or whatever it is. Those are collected by capturing specific fortresses in the game. When you go into the map menu for that challenge, you can check the battlefield information section, scroll over to the fortress information section, and any fortress that has a treasure chest next to its name indicates that there's some kind of treasure waiting for you in that fortress, obviously. So, it could be just a simple chest full of rupees, a heart piece or heart container if you brought that specific character along, or it's going to be a My Fairy clothing item. Be sure to check all of the fortresses that have treasure chests next to them, because it could be in any one of those. Oh, and let me just note right here that the fairies that you can collect in the battles, which help to dispel elemental barriers on different fortresses, are different from the My Fairies. The My Fairies will always come in bottles, like you can see from the image. Once you have collected a My Fairy, you can go into the My Fairy menu. In this menu, you can scroll between your different My Fairies that you've collected by hitting L and R, and you also have 3 menu options to adjust things with your fairies. The first option allows you to select all of the food that you've gathered for your fairies and feed it to them. The food is separated into bronze, silver, and gold level food, each of which will give your fairy a different amount of levels. All of the bronze foods will give your fairy 1 level, the silver foods will give them 2, and the gold foods will give them 3. It's important to manage what level your fairy is at, and sometimes not to overlevel them too quickly, in order for you to effectively raise them how you want. All of the food items will raise different personality traits that your fairy has, and although there are a total of 10 personality traits, every fairy can only have 5 at a time. You feed them food to raise these personality traits, and once they've hit certain levels, the skills menu is the third menu option, where you can equip your fairies with the skills that they've learned. And once your fairy has learned a skill by raising their personality traits, it remembers it forever. By default, a level 1 fairy can only have 1 skill equipped, but as you raise your fairies level up, they gain more slots for you to equip skills with. It's really impractical for me to go through this entire skill list explaining what they all do, or the different stats that are needed to get them. So, if you'd like to know more about that, I think that that is much better served by just checking a wiki information. So I'm going to leave links in the description, and probably in a comment to this video, to direct you towards the pages that can give you that information. One thing that I will add in here is that because your fairy can only have 5 personality traits equipped, they can't get every skill so easily. However, once your fairy has hit level 99, you're able to refresh them, which will undo the progress of you feeding them food, but will give them some extra benefits. So, when a fairy is level 99, you go into the food menu, and by default you can hit the Y button to access the refresh. When you refresh them, you'll be able to replace one of their personality traits with another personality trait of your choosing. Some of the later skills have incredibly high requirements for you to be able to access them, and it will seem impossible to get these when you're first raising your fairies. However, these are meant to be gotten through a fairy that has seen multiple refreshes, so if you've already gained all or most of the skills that you can get from that personality trait, you should definitely replace it with a different one so that you can start feeding it food that benefits the new personality trait and allow you to then get different skills that you couldn't get before. If you don't want to replace a personality trait, you don't have to. You can also change the My Fairy's name at the time of refresh if you want to. Something else to note is that all of the food secretly has its own elemental property. As you feed the fairy food of different elements, a certain elemental percentage gain is noted. You can see this by also hitting Y in the food menu. Depending on which element is higher, at level 25 and level 50, your fairy will gain an elemental effect that is added to the fairy blast attack that you're able to use during the actual battles. I'm going to get into the effects of that fairy blast attack a little bit later, but it's important to note that in order to have the elemental effect that you want, you also need to be careful about which food that you're going to feed your fairy. However, if you're just raising your fairy's levels en masse in order to get them multiple refreshes, then don't worry too much about the elements. All of the clothing that you're able to gain for your My Fairies comes in one of 5 categories. It's either going to be a top, a bottom, a decoration, headwear, or an accessory. All of the My Fairy clothes have their own element, and although you can dress your fairy up in any clothes that you wish, they will only gain certain clothing benefits by dressing them in clothes that match the fairy's own original element. And stepping back for just a moment, if you, for example, gave your light fairy fire food, and thus its fairy magic attack now has a fire element, that doesn't change what clothing that fairy gets a benefit from. By equipping the proper element fairy clothes top, your fairy will get more attack damage on their magic attack. By equipping an appropriate bottom, the percentage of magic that your character must gather before they can use the magic attack is lowered from 100% to 80%. The decoration item will increase the damage of your fairy's magic, and a headwear item will again lower the magic required in order to use the magic attack. If you have both a bottom and a headwear item equipped, you will now only need 3/5 of your magic meter full in order to start using your My Fairy Blast. Lastly, the accessories will increase the damage of that blast, just like the decorations and the tops. Something to note is that some of the tops in the game, for example this Fi dress, actually takes the place of both the top and the bottom slot. This will mean that you now get more damage for your fairy blasts, however you will not get the benefit of needing less magic in order to use your blast. For example, with all of my clothes equipped here, I will need to get 4/5 or 80% of my magic bar filled before I can use this fairy's magic attack. Speaking of those magic attacks, your fairy's level will also change the effectiveness and range of that blast. A level 1 fairy's magic attack will not have any additional benefits and will only affect a rather small area. It can still be used to get a good amount of KOs instantly, however, it doesn't have some of the ridiculous reach and potential of a higher level fairy's magic attack. Once your fairy has broken level 50, it will then have the highest range possible on its magic attack until you refresh it back down to level 1 again. So it's actually much wiser to raise your fairies to level 50 and leave them there, rather than always going for refreshing as much as possible. Save that all for one big burst once you have a good amount of food collected. The only thing left to explain are the different elemental effects that the My Fairies can have by raising them in specific ways. I'm going to cut to the clip from my review for the game in order to cover that in some pretty good detail. Gameplay-wise, they function to allow your character a new explosive fairy magic attack that affects a very large area around you, which is great for netting tons of easy KOs and helping you to reach your A-rank KO goals. However, this also leaves a lingering elemental effect on the affected blast area, which is based on what element of attack your fairy has gained, which itself is based on the kind of food that you fed your fairy. The light element effect creates a healing over time zone for all of your allies in the area, and the fire element effect reduces the defenses of all enemies in the area. The water element effect ups the defenses of all of your allies in the area, while the lightning element effect slows the marching speed of all your enemies in the area. Finally, the darkness element effect creates a damage over time zone for the enemies that are within the initial blast area. By the way, for my money, the fire effect is definitely the most useful, as it allows you to defeat boss characters much faster and chew through some tough enemy health bars with ease. So that does it for my long awaited My Fairy guide. I hope that the information found in this video was helpful to you and was able to answer most of your questions. But again, a lot of the details for this My Fairy stuff is just stats and numbers of the ways the different foods can raise your My Fairy stats. If you missed out on Legends and it's your first time playing with the My Fairy system, or it was never really that clear to you in the Legends release, I hope that you have a grand old time getting all the fairy stuff that you can.